The rapier is a one-handed civilian sword used in Renaissance Europe from roughly 1500 to 1700. The rapier cannot be said to have appeared at exactly one place or point in time. It continually evolved while it was in use. As a result, it can be difficult to define exactly what a rapier is because it had many forms and was made in many places. Generally, it is a one-handed sword oriented towards thrusting, but having some cutting capacity. Before the 1400s, swords were not normally worn by civilians, though a traveler might carry a military-style sword for defense on the road. During the 1400s, the sword became fashionable in Spain and Italy as an element of civilian dress, and specialized swords evolved for civilian use, giving rise to the rapier. Because these swords were used only for unarmored combat, the blades became longer and thinner. A rapier would never come in contact with steel armor, so it could afford to be lighter. The sword hilt in the Middle Ages had a simple crossguard at the top of the grip. However, as the technique of thrusting was used more, sword fighters would wrap a finger over the crossguard. Because this finger would then be susceptible to injury, a ring was added to protect it. During the 1500s, the hilt continued to develop to protect the unarmored hand. One example is this swept hilt rapier from the late 1500s or early 1600s. It weighs 2 pounds 9 ounces and has a blade length of 40 inches. A slightly later type of hilt was the cup hilt, which was seen most commonly in Spain. This particular sword is from Spain in the mid to late 1600s, weighs 2 pounds 6 ounces, and has a blade length of 42 1/4 inches. The rapier could be used with parrying devices, such as a cloak or a small shield. The cloak was especially useful in defense while traveling. If a person needed to engage in combat, he could simply slip his cloak off his shoulders and wrap it around his arm while drawing his sword. Daggers were often also used in conjunction with the rapier for parrying. It was fashionable for Renaissance gentlemen to wear stylishly matched rapier and dagger sets. By the 1600s, the rapier was starting to fall out of use. It was replaced by the small sword, which was essentially a lighter, thinner, and shorter rapier with little or no cutting capacity. Small swords were often elaborately decorated and followed current trends in male fashion. The small sword would eventually give rise to the modern-day sport, épée, and foil. One of the most common uses for the rapier was for dueling to settle disputes. One example of this in literature can be found in Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, where all of the duels are with rapiers. For dueling, self-defense, and sport, Renaissance gentlemen trained with fencing masters to learn the art of the sword. Every master had his own style, and some of their names are still familiar in pop culture today. The Princess Bride by William Goldman is a popular novel in which one of the main characters, Inigo Montoya, is a master swordsman with the rapier. As Goldman describes Inigo's duel with the dread pirate Roberts at the top of the cliffs of Insanity, Inigo repeated the Tybalt move, and again it didn't work. He switched to Capoferro, he tried Bonetti, he went to Fabri. In desperation, he began a move used only twice by Sanct. 3 of the masters mentioned in The Princess Bride were from Italy, and indeed Italians were the pioneers of rapier fencing. Camillo Agrippa published a treatise on rapier fencing in 1553, and classical rapier technique may be said to begin with him. He was an engineer, and he used mathematics and geometry to describe movements and positions. Agrippa is the first master in history known to rely almost exclusively on thrusting, and his pioneering work has been published in translation by Higgins Academy instructor Dr. Ken Monshine. Giacomo di Grassi's treatise of 1570 echoes the scientific spirit of Agrippa. His work became influential in England because it was translated to English in 1594. The Higgins Armory Museum has an original copy of di Grassi's Italian text of 1570. Although the most famous masters came from Italy, some came from other countries. The Spanish school was more theoretical and less practical than Italian styles. Geronimo de Carranza was known as the inventor of the science of the arms, and published his treatise in 1569. Like many rapier masters, he considered swordplay to be science. In his words, a perfect theoretical knowledge must infallibly lead to victory, notwithstanding grievous physical disadvantage. Girard Thibault was one of the few major French fencing masters, and was heavily influenced by the Spanish style. His treatise, Académie de l'Espée, was published in 1628. Thibault's Spanish influences can be seen in his detailed mathematical descriptions of fencing and elaborate illustrations. Joachim Meyer was a German fencing master who published his treatise in 1570. His rapier techniques are influenced by both Italian fencing styles and traditional German sword fighting. The Higgins Armory also has an original copy of his text, and a translation has been published by Higgins curator Jeffrey L. Forgang.